streaming here. Okay, let's start to get set up while I'm doing announcements. Go ahead and make a folder for today. Oops. Okay, so let's just go over announcements. I know we're always kind of tight on time here. So keep track of your assignments. I know we kind of have a lot out. Okay, so this one's due today, I think, right? Yeah. Okay, how many people already finished this or are very close to finishing this?
I got finished and I just submitted it.
Okay, perfect.
I finished it.
Okay. So that's going to be the last assignment where, like, what we're going to learn today is basically like all modern techniques. So we're going to learn about CSS, what's called CSS Grid, and CSS Grid and Flexbox. That's pretty much all you need. Okay. The method I had you do of using the media queries with Flexbox is a little bit of a hack. We have something more powerful called Grid that can do that a lot better, but we have to learn things one at a time. Okay. How many people are, now that you know Flexbox a little bit, how many people are liking that for layout? It's okay. Is it a little tough to use, do you find?
A little tough.
Okay.
Just gotta memorize a couple more.
Okay. Compared to box model, do you find it easier or harder to use? About the same? Okay. Okay, so it looks like most people got that done. How many people got the Flexbox Froggy
Not yet.
at least started?
Haven't started yet.
Okay. And then this is going to be a little tough because I usually don't like to do things on the same day as the exam, but this will be due in 2 weeks. But this is relatively simple. So this is we're gonna learn something here. We're gonna learn something today called Grid, and this is cool because what this does is it.
Oh, I love the grid.
Yeah, these are pretty good. So if you remember Flexbox, I told you it's when you need to kind of line up things in a single direction, either as a column or row. Grid is when you're going two directions at the same time. Okay, and this is just kind of a little exercise. So it's saying, okay, use this. It's basically the same thing, but now you're trying to water plants and carrots and other things in this. Or I think they also have like you're trying to put poison on weeds, but we'll learn about this today. But as you can see, so we're saying, okay, well, do I want to start on column 2? No. 4? No. 3, perfect. Okay. Same idea. Yeah, and here we're trying to kill weeds, I guess. Okay, but you get the idea on that. So that's due in 2 weeks. I'll be doing the same day as the exam, which I don't normally like to do, but we're a little pressed for time. What I may do is something like where maybe I'll give you like an extra 48 hours or something like that for some people. But I don't want this to go into after the exam because we're going to shift focus after the exam. So the second half of the semester, it's going to be basically taking the things we learned in the first half of the semester and then start to use these things called content management systems like WordPress. And then we're going to start to use Twitter makes a CSS framework called Bootstrap. How many people have heard of that before?
Yeah.
Okay, it makes life a little bit simpler, but it's kind of a higher level tool. Right now we're working in raw CSS, but we're second half of the semester we're going to work in higher level tools. Okay, and then so the midterm will be in 2 weeks, and then next class we'll do a review. What we're going to do is the midterm is going to be based off of today's lecture. Today's lecture, you're not going to have a coding assignment. Like I said, like I just showed you, you had the garden thing. That's going to be the assignment. But it shouldn't be that big of a deal. So we're going to go over an example today. Next week we're going to do more practice, and then that's what your exam's going to be on. Does that make sense? The reason I'm choosing to do this grid garden thing is because it gives you a lot more practice with things a little bit more sophisticated than what we're going to do today. The grids that we're going to do today are very simplistic. It's going to be like it's going to be closer to like what you'd see on the Audubon Society, but you can actually do very sophisticated things with grid. So this is a site that's kind of useful called Grid by Example, and it shows you all the different things you can do. So you can actually span multiple columns, you can span rows, you can do things out of order. I've never used these out of order features. Like Flexbox has that as well. I've never used them in practice, but they must be useful if if they made them. Okay. So any questions? I know we got a lot going on here. So basic due dates to keep track of. Don't forget today's assignment, which it looks like most people have already finished, but in case you haven't, don't forget about Flexbox Froggy. Don't forget, so that one's due next week. Grid Garden is due in 2 weeks, which happens to be the same day as the exam, so I'd suggest getting it done early. The exam, we're going to go over all the details next week, but the exam is going to be based off of the example that we do today. I think that's pretty much everything you need, okay? And don't forget the point values of these. Like, for example, assignment number 2, this would be 10% of your overall grade. In general, what I do on those types of assignments is like your starting grade is like mid or high 90s, and then it's like the last little bit of points is basically how much effort like I feel like you went to. But something like assignment number 4 or 5, that's kind of like an all or nothing deal. Either you finished it all or so that one, the starting grade is just 100. If you just did the assignment, you get 100, okay? And then same thing with midterms and finals. I'm not expecting you to do extra stuff because that's like a midterm and final as long as you met the basic requirements, okay? Okay, I guess let's go ahead and get started. So you made a folder for today. Go ahead and open up brackets. Did we start grid last week?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Huh.
Maybe I think you showed us like a little bit.
Oh, yeah, okay. Okay.
Not sure.
Okay. Let's go ahead and. So if you remember, okay, well, let's go ahead and. So we're actually only going to do probably one example today. We'll still call it EX1, but. Go to HTML shell. Okay, so this is our starting point. So we've got a folder for today. You've got ex1.html. We've got a blank page over here. Don't forget this initial scale thing here because this becomes important when we do actually all of this. When we do media queries. So that don't forget there's this little button here that says include viewport meta tag. Make sure that's set to yes. That just sets us up for when we're doing media queries for it to work correctly. Okay, so I'll kind of quickly just take a second here and just sketch out the basic layout that we're going to try to accomplish today. Okay. So the basic idea is going to be something like, I can't see it. Make it a little larger. There we go. Okay, so it's going to be something like where we have some sort of big banner across the top, and then kind of, remember we have like this container type thing, something like that. So this is going to be our container. and maybe we'll even do some sort of footer. And then so what we'll have up here is our site name or some sort of logo. We won't actually make a logo, but and the right hand side, this will be our nav. So we'd have like link 1. You get the idea. So what we're going to do here is that this dotted outline, this is going to be our container, and then we're going to put this whole thing as a margin auto to center it. So that centers it. And then this thing up here is going to be a flex box. And then we're going to have, I was getting confused. I think this is space between. And then that'll basically shove that to the left, shove that to the right. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a bunch of cards, and then we're going to have a grid. So we'll make these cards. There'll be some sort of image up here. Some sort of text. That'll be like an H1. And then lorem ipsum. And then we can have multiple. We may do 2 rows worth of these things. Okay. And then these are all going to be inside of a grid. Okay. Get the basic idea. It's pretty standard site. Okay. So let's quickly talk about grid. So this is just on W3 schools, but you get the idea is that grid is when we're going 2 directions versus flexbox when we are either just concerned about a row or a column. Now the most basic way, W3 schools isn't super great on this. There's the CSS trick site. I don't know if, I think you have this in your links. If not, I'll add it after class. W3 schools grid. I'll add this site after class. But you can just Google it for it, just CSS tricks grid. So to use it, you know how before we did display flexbox? Here we do, or I'm sorry, it's just display flex. Here we do display grid. Now the simplest usage is just setting up grid template columns and grid template rows. So we're going to keep things simple. We're just going to say that each column is going to be a certain way. So this is going to be kind of our goal, something like this. And our basic idea is that we want it to take up equal sizing. Okay, so what we're going to say is that each column by default is going to be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And then what's nice about it is as you add more things, it automatically knows to overflow. So if we set it up and say, okay, it needs to be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, as soon as we get to the 4th div, it's going to know, okay, well, I've taken up as many columns as I've been assigned, so it goes down to the next row. And then once we get to number 7, same deal, okay? Now you can do the same thing with rows, but I find myself not using rows as often. What we're going to do is that we're going to make these evenly spaced, but you don't necessarily have to. But for the most part, I've seen these generally be even spaced. So this is our template. This is basically saying this is going to kind of be our default operation on how we work. Okay. Now, we're not going to do this today because I kind of want to keep it simple. But what we can do is, rather than saying that this takes up something equally, what we can do is that we can say that there's, and you'll learn this in the grid garden, is that we can actually say that we want this column to span multiple columns. Keep scrolling. Yeah. So you can say where the grid column starts. But then we can get into what's called grid areas. Hold on, let me keep on going, keep on going. I think it's over here on the right. Yeah. So on the actual item, so that's on the main container. And now on the actual item, what we can do is that we can say, okay, it's going to start at column 3 and it's going to span 2 columns. And that's what they would do is something like here. What they're doing is say, okay, start on column 1 and span 2 columns. So if this were 3 columns, notice below how this is set up. So if this is 1, 2, 3 columns, notice that this is taking up 2/3. What you can do is say that, okay, this card is actually going to take up 2 spots. And so what we can do is say, okay, span 2. And it'll actually span 2 columns. There's kind of a cool site here, Grid by Example. It shows a bunch of different examples, but let me find the closest that's simple. Yeah, so you can see here is on A, what they did is they said start on column 1 up to 3, but not including 3. So essentially it's saying take up columns 1 and 2. Now you can see that they did actually the same thing here with rows. So they're saying, okay, start on, for the row, start on row 1 and go up 2, but not including 3. So basically rows 1 and 2. And then C and D are just normal. Okay. We're not going to get that complicated today, and you'll learn about that in the grid garden thing. You'll get through all that. Okay. I apologize. Normally I try to have these posted before class, but I should have checked. Okay. W3 Schools has some stuff on this, but I don't know how great their material is. I think that's what's posted right now. But anyway. Also, there's another property that we'll work a little bit with here called grid and column gap. So this is basically saying how much space we want between these. It should be pretty obvious that this is the column gap between the two. So in this case, this area right here would be the column gap. And this space here would be the row gap. Okay, pretty straightforward. Okay. So that's basically all we need to know to get started. Let's go ahead and actually start coding. Oops. Okay. So let's start off with, we're going to have a big container like we, actually, we'll start off with the basics. Let's start off with a header. That's going to be our banner. We'll start off with an H1. Oops. Okay, so let's do this. We'll have a style up here. And we're going to have our class banner. And let's just give it some sort of background color. Something dark, kind of like IRC does with our dark blue.
Dark royal blue.
Dark, royal.
Don't have it then.
What's the closest that we have here?
Dark slate blue.
Dark slate blue, perfect.
Yeah, I just want to say the guard thing, about 6 minutes. I just did that.
What's that?
I just did the guard like about 6 minutes.
Okay. It's pretty cool the things you can do with grid, right? Yeah,
Oh,
it's
yeah,
pretty.
no, yeah,
It's pretty powerful, yeah. Okay, so we want this to span the full background. And then let's just have this say right now, for right now, logo. And then we'll get this started. Okay. Now, just as a little hint, what we can do is, this is what I usually do, body or HTML comma body. Just get rid of all of its default padding and any default margins that it gives us. There's actually a CSS, I want to think it's called normalized.css or something that you can actually use to do this. Let's see what's generating extra stuff here. Oh, it's the stupid H1. Let's not use an H1. H1 has default stuff. We'll be lazy. We'll just use a div for now. That's one of the problems with some of these tags, is that they have default styling. And it was just giving us extra margin that we didn't want to have to deal with right now. Okay. Bless you. And then let's create a class. Actually, sometimes you don't need to create a whole class. Let's just do an inline style. Font size, 40 pixels. And then maybe give it a little bit of 8 pixels might be good. Yeah, okay, that's okay. Okay, so right now all I did was kind of reset the margin and padding on HTML and body. We created a new banner class. And then inside of here, I just did a inline style just to kind of cheat. We could have created a whole different CSS class for it. Maybe we would later, but this is okay for now. So now let's also create a simple navigation. You could put real links, but we're going to cheat. We're just going to write link 1, link 2, link 3. That'll give us this, which isn't really what we want. So let's do this. We want this thing to be on the left. We want our logo to be on the left. We want the nav to be on the right. So inside of this banner container, let's go ahead and do display flex. And so this is going to be one item in the flex, and then this whole nav is going to be an item in the flex. Okay, we can kind of see that here. Have this up for reference. So if we want the thing to be on one side and the other to, so this would be the logo, this would be our navigation. We would do justify content, space between. So let's go ahead and do that. Justify content. space between. And I'll take a second here and make sure everyone's on the same page. So what we've done so far is we've created a header. That's going to be our banner, essentially. We created a div. We were kind of lazy. We just kind of, because we're only going to use this once, just gave it a large font size, white color. That's going to be our logo. We created a nav, which doesn't really have much styling to it yet. It kind of looks pretty bad, but we'll try to clean that up in a second. Then for our banner, we gave it a background color, some padding. Those were just kind of stylistic things. And then set it up to use Flexbox and put space between. So now what's going to happen is that space between gives us this. So that means that this logo is going to be on the left and this navigation is going to be on the right. By default, this unordered list is a little bit difficult to work with. So what we can do is maybe we should give this a class, call it primary nav. And then we'll say that the unordered list within primary nav I think there's a few different ways we can do this. So we can, how do we do it last week? I want to stay consistent. Let me look up last week's example. Nope. Was it the week before? Did I just open up 3, 2? There we go. Okay. So, oh, we did it as flex. Okay. So we can do is on this UL, what we can do is just flex it. So we can set display is flex, and then list style type none. We're not going to spend too much time on minor details, but we at least want it readable. Okay, we'll clean some of this up later, but this is okay for now. So we've got our logo on the left, our navigation on the right. Obviously, you'd probably want to spread this out a little bit more, but we'll get to some of those things later if we have time. Okay. So is everyone good so far? So we've got our HTML body. We basically set we reset the margin and the padding. We created this banner class, and we set it up for Flexbox. We've got our logo on the left and our navigation on the right. We created a header called banner, and then here's our logo. We just kind of did an inline style, and our navigation. And here what we're saying is that there's a class called primary nav, and then the unordered list within that, we want to set it up to display flex because we want to flex these individual things right here. wanted to get rid of that bullet, so we set list style type to none, and the text color is white. That's good enough for that for now. If you remember from our drawing, we didn't want it to go all the way to the edge of the screen. So let's go ahead and define a container. So I'm going to put it up here. And our container, let's go ahead and set it to, it'll make sense why I'm choosing these values. 960 pixels, margin auto. And then let's go ahead and give it a border just so we can see what we're working with. We can always get rid of the border later. So now there's two ways we can handle this. If we want the, so don't type anything. We'll give you options and then we'll vote to see what's better. So if we put our container all the way on the outside, notice what happens is that we lose, it doesn't go all the way to the edge. But what we probably want is to where this stays in the same place, but that background blue goes all the way to the edge. So to do that, what we actually have to do is kind of create a kind of a dummy class here. So what we'll do is this outer class, let's leave this for now because it might take up some time. We'll come back to this in a second. Because what happens is it's going to mess up our, if we put something in between here, it's going to mess up our flex over here on our banner. So we'll just leave this for now. This is good enough for now. Okay. Okay, so that banner, that's good enough for now just because we've only got about a little more than half an hour left. So now let's get to the important stuff. Let's actually start setting up our grid. Okay, so we'll set up, and we'll call it section. This is going to be a different section of our page. And this is going to be inside of one big container. So we're going to say class is equal to container. And remember, the only purpose of the container is just to kind of keep it within certain boundaries. Then we're going to have a div. That's going to be our main content of the page. This is essentially going to be our grid. And then we're going to have individual cards. So this is kind of the main area of our page. It's going to be wrapped in a container. We're going to have our main content. And our main content is going to be a grid. And then let's go ahead and create a card. So we're going to have div class is equal to card. And then the things that we probably want to have inside of our card, we're going to have an image. So we'll say image class equals card image. We'll create all these classes in a little bit. So it'll be image, then a title. So we'll make that an h1 class is equal to card title. And then some sort of text on the inside. I'll call that card body. Put a little bit of space around this so it's a little bit more readable. So this is going to be our card. We have a container class called card, and it's going to have an image at the top. It's going to have an H1, and then a paragraph. So sometimes we get into the weeds of the code itself, but don't forget the big picture of what this thing's supposed to look like when it's done, is that we're supposed to have our big banner across the top with our logo and navigation. And then now we're working on these individual grid items. And so this container just kind of keeps it in the middle of the page. This is our main content. Inside of that, and now we've got an individual card. And then that card's going to have an image, title, and body. Is everyone good? Okay, so let's scroll up. Now let's actually start to define some of these classes. So let's say underneath our container, we'll try to kind of keep some of this stuff together. We've got our main content. And remember, this is going to be our grid. So we're going to set it to display grid. Now we want those cards to be 300 pixels wide. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up those, remember we had this property grid template columns. We're going to say, okay, each card is going to be 300 pixels, 300 pixels, 300 pixels. So this will be our starting point, okay? Now let's get some I've had good luck with this one right here called pixum.photos. I don't know if any of them are any better, but we'll do this. So you can just go to pixum.photos. By default, if you just do this, it just gives you a random image. But if you put an ID in there, notice like this, it'll give you the same image every time. So we'll mess with that in a little bit. For right now, let's just go ahead and we'll do the same image. If we have time after, we'll kind of mix it up a little bit. But you can set it up so that you have different images for each card each time. So we'll do say source equals, and then let's do a 300 by 300. So I'll take a minute here. I just want to make sure that nobody got left behind. So we've got our main container. This is going to be our grid. And up in the style section, we defined it as that each card is going to be 300 pixels. So we're going to have 300 pixels, 300 pixels, 300 pixels. And then as we add new cards, it's going to know to automatically wrap around to the next row. Now we've made a card, but this has essentially been empty. Maybe we'll fill in some stuff here, maybe not. But a lot of times I like to have class names just so you know what the thing is, if that makes sense. So I know that this is a card. This is the image for the card. This is the title for the card. This is the body for the card. Okay, and we'll fill in just like my title. You could fill in lorem ipsum if you want, but we'll just do this for now. Probably not much to look at just yet. So this is our card. It's got a title and some text. Now what we need to do is this 3 times. So take this card, make sure everything's good with this card, and just copy and paste it 2 more times so that we have 3 cards total. They're going to be identical. You could go back and change things as needed, but for now this is okay. So we've got our big container holding everything. We set margin auto so it's centered. This is going to be our grid, and then these are going to be the individual items within the grid. And because we set up that grid to be 300 pixels, that allows it to kind of stay within its container. Now what you'll notice is that these are kind of all crammed together and left aligned. What we can actually do, if we go up to, so we haven't made a card class just yet. This would be a good spot. So let's go ahead and make a card class. I'm sorry, we're not going to do this in card. We're get rid of this. We're going to do that. We actually have to do this inside of our grid. Okay, so we set up our grid. So these are going to be the template columns. Right now, everything's left aligned. So just like with Flexbox, we have justify content, and we can set that to center. And now our individual items. Oops.
Wait, what? Okay.
So under main content, so we could set this to center. I wonder if space. See if space between works.
It's not wanting to do it with me, even if I put it in the main content field.
Let me take a quick look. If not, I can help you after class. It's not.
Yeah.
See it. Just I guess try to kind of follow along. So I'm not seeing it right off the.
There's a mark in this container, there's the UL, and there's the main content.
And then scroll down and just make sure that you actually use the main content.
Oh, wait. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And then it looks like it's unsaved. Just make sure you save before it's.
What the? Okay. Nope. Still not wanting to.
Go back to it.
There, press save.
Okay. Because we don't have a whole lot of time. Just do this. Try to follow along, and then what I'll do is after class, I'll take a deeper look into it. And we'll
Okay.
see where it went wrong. And then don't forget, I post these code examples after class too. Okay. So we have this we can work with, but let's do this. Let's just set it back to center, and then let's give it a grid column gap. Remember we had that property. And 20 pixels should be good. Okay, and then that basically, that puts some gap in between here. Makes sense so far? So we've got our banner on the top, we've got our container centering everything, and we've got our individual cards. Now you'd obviously, because we're time constrained, you put some more detail into certain things, but this is okay for now. So now let's go ahead and try to make it responsive, because what'll happen is as soon as I hit right around that 960 pixels, what happens? It kind of starts to shrink. It's probably not what we want to do. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's add a breakpoint. So at the bottom, just right here, we're going to add a media query at media. So as soon as we hit 960 pixels or smaller, so up to 960 pixels, we want to take that inner container, which is right now, that container is 960 pixels, and we want to make it something a little bit smaller. We're going to actually have 2 breakpoints on this example, okay? So imagine as like desktop, tablet, and then phone. And then now let's say, okay, we want the width to be 660 pixels. Well, obviously our cards can't be 300 pixels anymore because that added up to about 900 pixels. So let's do this. On our grid, rather than having 300, 300, 300 like we have up here, let's just override just this one property. Remember, we can do that. We can override just an individual property. Let's just make it 200 pixels, 200 pixels, 200 pixels. So it's kind of hard to see, but now you'll notice that the cards shrink, but we end up with this weird kind of overlapping image thing. I'm not going to explain this too much, but basically what we have to do is, at least we can put it somewhere with our grid, I guess. Remember we had that image, that card image? What we do is we want to force the image to basically stay within its container. So what we do is we just say that the width is going to be 100%. The height is going to be auto. It's basically going to automatically correctly resize it for us. So we have this class called card img. We're going to set the width to 100%, the height to auto. Remember that down here, our image, remember we gave it a class card img. Now there are techniques for doing responsive photos, but to me this is the simplest that we can do within the kind of time that we have. But there are more sophisticated ways where you can actually have different images for different breakpoints. But we'll keep it simple. This kind of works. And so now when we go to different image sizes, oh, hold on. Okay, so this is our widest size. Notice what happened. It didn't do that overflow where it was kind of the images were over each other. Okay, and now we need our last breakpoint here. Is that when we're at 660 pixels, which we'll consider like a mobile device. rather than having a fixed width container like we previously did, we're just going to say on mobile devices, just take up the full width. It's going to be a single column design, so we don't really need that idea of a container anymore. So we just set the width to 100%. And then rather than having 3 columns, we just want it to kind of collapse down to a single column. So all we have to do is under our grid, we're going to set grid template columns to auto. And if we just do auto once, we're saying, okay, this is just going to be 1 column, and just let it automatically resize. We're not going to really try to set any pixel size or anything. Just let it be auto. And then what you'll see here is that, okay, on the desktop, it looks like this. Maybe tablet, it shrinks down to that. And then once we get to mobile, probably want to center this. Trying to think what we can do here. I think we can just we'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, I wanted to make sure I didn't lose too many people. I know I've probably lost a few people so far. Let's take a step back and let's kind of see the big picture. The big picture is that we created a banner across the top. We have our container class. And then we've got our banner inside of that. Then we have our logo and our navigation. And what we did is we said that, okay, banner is going to be display flex. And I don't know how to set this to center. We wanted space between, I think should be good. Yeah, that probably works. Oh, sorry. I think I said it on the wrong spot. That makes sense now. We want, because banner's not a grid, we want that in main content. Grid column gap. It looks like it still gave us a decent column gap by default, but that's not where I wanted it. We can actually, let's just go ahead and remove that property. It's not, because we put space between, it's not really doing anything for us anyway, so I'm just going to get rid of it. It shouldn't actually affect it because we've, yeah, still works. Okay. So now we've moved on to our grid. And instead of our grid, we've got our regular container. Then we've got our grid, and then our individual grid items. And so let's go up to main content here, where our grid is. We're saying that this is going to be the grid. By default, it's going to be 300 pixels, 300 pixels, 300 pixels, and then space between. But then what we want to do is add breakpoints that when the screen shrinks to 960 pixels, which was our old container size, go ahead and shrink the container a little bit. Set up our columns so they're no longer 300, 300, 300, or slightly smaller. And then once we get onto mobile devices, our breakpoint 660 pixels. Notice how these kind of map to each other. By the way, these are arbitrary. I basically took this, added up to 600 and added a little bit extra. There was nothing really scientific about this. This is going to be 100%. And what we can actually do, I think, to center this is that, remember we had set justify content space between. We should actually be able to set justify content to center. That should do what we want. So let's see what it looks like on, yeah. Okay. I know that was kind of a lot to go through. How many people were able to keep up, and their example at the end kind of looks something sort of like this? A few people? Okay.
Got almost everything except mine won't do the rows.
Okay.
That was the hard thing I had to work on. That
I
was the difficult thing I had to work on last time.
It gets tough doing these large examples because if you mess up at one spot, then the whole thing doesn't work. So what we're going to do next class is that we're going to do this over again, and maybe what I'll do is I'll give you kind of a starting point. So we'll get to go through this whole example again next time, and maybe I'll give you some starting code. That way you don't have to type so much, because I know it's very easy during class to make errors. But this kind of gives you the sense of this is kind of like a modern layout. That we've got some sort of banner at the top with navigation on the right. We could add in some padding, some things here and there. Maybe I'll do that on your starter code next week. And then we've got this grid. And then it's responsive. I don't like that. Well, I'm not going to change anything now. We'll worry about that next class. But it's responsive and it works for various device sizes, okay? And you may not realize it, but these exact techniques you could extend to make a site like this. This is just the difference between what we made and this is just detail work. Colors, fonts, margins and padding, little things here and there, but it's just essentially detail work. But the actual layout techniques that you've learned, you can apply. Worked?
Yeah,
Okay, perfect.
it was being a douche.
Okay.
I forgot to close the divs on the card.
Oh yeah, that'll do it. I think that's it. I guess I could make other adjustments, but I think this is a good stopping point. You could add a footer. We could do other things. So what I'll do is obviously I'll post this code, but everyone gets the basic idea of how grid works. Let's do one more thing, because there was a request for this earlier. This pixum.photos, if you'll notice, by default, it gives us the exact same image for all three.
Yeah.
But they actually have a feature that,
Yeah, whereas you can find a list of all the images.
yeah, I think they actually, right, is it at the top where it says list all or something?
No. If you scroll down right there, you can next to the picture of the dog, you can find a list of all the images, and then there's here. Click on that, and
gotcha.
then it'll
Okay.
give you a list of all the images, and then it gives you the number of each image.
Perfect. So
That's
let's
what
say,
you put
so if we
in
wanted
the
this, what we would do is we add in this, we say ID / the ID number.
Yep. Yeah, and then you put the dimensions. Yep.
Yeah, so it's going to be / ID, the actual ID that they give you, and then these last two are still going to be the dimensions.
Yeah, because I was trying to figure that out at first, and then I noticed they have a list of all the images. It felt like different.
They'll be the same every time. And so let's say, for example, we want this. So this is going to be 10,005. Now when you go to your page, you can have different images. obviously this one we didn't set to anything. That's why it keeps on, but you get the idea. Okay, I know some of these layout techniques get a little bit involved, but does everyone kind of feel comfortable with the general sense of how grid works? It's always the details, right? It's always the actual, once you actually get to writing code, then things change. But this is kind of a relaxed paced course as far as like how much material we have to cover in what time. So it seems like maybe this was a little bit much to do in one class. So what we'll do is next class I'll give you some kind of template starter code.
Thank you.
I'll fill in the class names, and then we'll do this example again. And then maybe we'll do a little bit more detail work as far as like spacing and that sort of stuff, okay?
Thank you.
But as usual, I'll post what we did today so you can actually look at it at least, but it looks like maybe typing that much code. It's very, very error prone. I get it. And trying to do that much in like less than an hour can be a little tough. But that's all I wanted to do today is one giant example. This is basically, just to let you know, this is what you're going to have to do for your midterm. But you can use code examples that we did in class. Does it make sense? So on your midterm, what I might say is on your midterm, instead of a 3-column design, do a 4-column design. Add a footer, sort of like your assignments, okay? And it's going to be based off of this example that we do today in next class. So you'll get one more week of review of this. And it's just going to be 2 main subjects. It's going to be Flexbox and Grid, and just using those to make simple layouts like this, okay?
Cool.
All right, so I'll post the code. You can look forward to that. And then